who might be.
We're live.
Good evening. My name is Keith Brandt, and I'm the pastor of the Monroe Street Christian Church in Los Angeles, California. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study and prayer meeting. We are continuing our study in the book of Daniel. Yes, eventually we will finish this, but we are still in the study of the book of Daniel. And we're using this study guide the book of Daniel from the Smart Guide to the Bible series by Damon R. Duck and Larry Richards, Ph.D. And most of the time, things are fairly easy to understand, but we have to understand that the book of Daniel is not easily understood all the time. And so it takes some real intense checking and so forth to get a handle on what Daniel is being told, especially about so many things that will not involve him, and but will involve the people that come after him, and in the end times, where we are now, it will be involving us. So we praise God for the material, for the commentary, even though we don't always see absolutely eye to eye with every single point of view, but mostly, okay? We were in Daniel 9:26 last week, but I've gone over that again, and I want to touch on a couple of things that we may have missed. So we're starting at Daniel 9:26. That says, after the 62 weeks, which is 434 years. And the verse reads, Daniel 9:26, and after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood, and till the end of the war, desolations are determined. All right? And these verses here, before we even get to the commentary part, have their own sense of commentary when we look at them. But we'll go to what the commentator says. Gabriel was telling Daniel that after the second period of 62 weeks, which is 434 years, Jesus would be cut off or crucified. He would have nothing, he means earthly things. He would have nothing, no earthly possessions, home, throne, or kingdom. In fact, he would not have put an end. Now, the commentator says he would not have put an end to sin. But I believe that's not correctly put. Because what Jesus did on the cross puts an end to sin, if we will embrace it. All right? So I don't think it was quite right to say that he would not have put an end to sin, finished transgression, or fulfilled all the visions and prophecies either. Well, Jesus wasn't meant to fulfill all of the prophecies in his physical second coming. That we know. But as far as what he was going to do to bring forth salvation from sin, the cleansing action of his sacrifice, that was accomplished on the cross. All right? He says Jesus would die before doing everything that God decreed for him to do. This was done at the cross in AD 32. So I think he kind of misstates that when he tells you it's not happening, and then he says it was done at the cross, because that is what I was saying. When Jesus shed his blood, the sacrifice for sin was accomplished. The most important thing that involves you and me. He says, and there was no more bad news. There was more bad news. Following the death of Jesus, Jerusalem and the rebuilt temple would be destroyed again. This was done by a Roman general named Titus in 70 AD. He sacked and burned Jerusalem. Now he says killed 5 million Jews and tore the temple apart stone by stone. And it is correct, that is what they did to the temple. Josephus says 1 million Jews. Another commentator that we're going to read says hundreds of thousands. But I think it is correct to say that there were millions that were killed. All right? He says, but there was another important point. Gabriel mentioned a prince who is to come. This is a reference to the coming Antichrist. And it is important because it identifies the group of nations he will come out of. We just pointed out that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. So the Romans are the people of the prince who was to come. This tells us that the Antichrist, when he comes, he will come out of the nations that made up the old Roman Empire during the earthly life of Jesus. I don't know that every commentator agrees with that, all right? But it certainly is a wholesome point of view. This brings us to a final point. We've looked at the first two time periods, the 7 weeks, which were 49 years, and the 62 weeks, which were 434 years. This is a total of 69 weeks or 483 years. But God decreed 70 weeks or 490 years would pass before everything was fulfilled. This means he must start his clock again so that the last 7 years can tick off. We have also noticed 4 things that would happen after the period of 62 years, the 434 years. 62 weeks, 434 years. Jesus would be killed. Jerusalem would be destroyed in 70 A.D. The temple would be destroyed. And 4, Jerusalem and the temple would be desolate until the time of the end. Okay? So we're in the time of the end now. And the temple is getting ready to be rebuilt. These 4 things had to happen before God would start his clock. His clock is stopped right now. It has stopped for over 1900 years. And we do not know when he will start it. However, most prophetic experts think it will be soon because Jerusalem is no longer desolate and many of the Jews are seeking to rebuild the temple. All right? And some people believe that 7 years will begin from the date of the rapture, that the final 7 years will tick off from when the church is raptured out and begin at that point.
But Pastor, those 7 years are aside of the 490, or they're part of the 490?
They're part of the 490. They're the last...
So 483 years have gone
yes, right. Right. And also there's the possibility that the 7 years will begin when the temple is rebuilt. All right? Does that mean when the first brick is laid or the last brick is laid? I don't know. Those 2 possibilities are very probable. How will the 70 weeks, the 490 years end? They will end with a flood of destruction. Nations will rise against nations, and there will be wars and rumors of wars all through history until the last greatest war, called the Battle of Armageddon. The Jews themselves would suffer many things, and Jerusalem would be desolate until the time of the end.
Pastor,
yes.
With that last comment that you just said, that some think that when the temple will be built, I don't think it could be when the first brick would be laid, because then that means if the time period starts, that's the beginning of the tribulation period, and in the first 3.5 years, isn't the Antichrist going to allow or help the Jews make the sacrifices in the new temple?
Yes. Yes. So it is, but the 7-year period still may begin before he stops the sacrifices, because it's the first 3.5 years he's Mr. Good Guy. It's the last 3.5 years he turns into who he really is. And the Jews pull away from him then and reject him. Yeah. The failure to accomplish everything God wanted was not on the part of Jesus, but on the part of the Jews. All right. Nationally, they did not accept him. And we notice on Palm Sunday, on the triumphal entry, how many wanted to. But the religious hierarchy wasn't doing it. And so when the church came into being at that same time, right after Jesus' resurrection and all, the church went out, preached the right message, and many accepted Christ, some Jews. Jesus prepared to make his triumphal entry by sending 2 disciples after a donkey and her colt. If anyone says to you anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. All this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the prophet, saying, tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey, from Matthew 21, 3 through 5, and Zechariah 9, 9. Referring to himself as Lord, Jesus has said this in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, amounted to a public declaration of his messiahship. He approached Jerusalem as the Messiah, weeping over the city. He said, if you'd known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace. And we're not just talking about political peace. We're talking about the saving of their souls, accepting Jesus as the Messiah, their peace, their personal peace, their heavenly prospects, everything. He says, but now they are hidden from your eyes. That doesn't mean God just deliberately hid them from them. Their disobedience kept them from recognizing them. If the Jews had realized this was the prophesied day that their Messiah would arrive, that accepting him would bring them peace, and if they would have done that, he would have fulfilled everything and established his kingdom right away. Okay? But remember, God knew ahead of time they weren't going to do that anyway. He didn't program them not to do it. He just knew they weren't going to do it. All right? But they failed to recognize him. Remember, even if they had recognized him, he would still have had to have been sacrificed. But they failed to recognize the day and to accept him as Messiah. Jesus knew that would happen. He knew that his crucifixion was near and that he would soon be cut off. Because of the Jewish failure, their nation was spiritually separated from God, the church, and the church was brought in. Now let's stop right there. I do not believe by any manner or means that the church was brought in to take their place. No, that is not what happened. The church responded. Whoever accepted Christ responded the way the Jews were supposed to respond. Okay? And some Jews did respond. Every one of the apostles were Jews. And those in the early church, and think of the thousands, the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000, they were responding. There were Jews that responded. But the hierarchy, the main honchos, didn't.
So he's saying in this text, as it's written, he's saying that us, the church, we're here to replace the Jews?
There is that teaching, and it is a false teaching. The church did not come to replace the Jews. The church came to be what the Jews also are called to be.
Which is what Jesus was there doing.
Yes.
He was the coming Messiah.
Right. See? And more so even, we have been grafted in, the Bible says in the New Testament, we have been grafted into Israel. Certainly what Israel is supposed to become and will become.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the Jewish failure, their nation was spiritually separated. We said that. The last 7 years of Gabriel's message, the tribulation period, remain to be fulfilled. This will happen before the second coming of Jesus Christ. Wycliffe Bible Commentary says, it is agreed by most all evangelical interpreters that these two events, the cutting off of the Messiah, the anointed one, that's Christ, and the destruction of the sanctuary refer to the crucifixion of Christ and the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. These two events were separated by a period of 40 years, yet in the literary order of the passage, they are both after the 69th week and before the final 1 week mentioned in the next text. Thus, the very syntax, grammar, and word meaning indicate a gap in the succession of the 70 weeks. So the 70 weeks ended, the 69 weeks ended. And now we're getting ready for the last week. And so it's been over 2,000 years.
But 1 week equals 70 years.
Seven. 1 week is 7 years.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's right. So, because last week we were talking about when Jesus went into Jerusalem in the donkey, or when he was crucified,
Uh-huh.
that was the end of the 490 years?
No, that was the end of the
100
483.
Oh, so there was two 400-year periods. Like the 480, there was, the end of the 483, leaving 7 years left.
Yeah, and the 7 year, we've been waiting for the 7 years all this time.
Oh.
The tribulation period, that's what's left. See?
It's like waiting for a final exam.
Right. John Rice says this prophecy was fulfilled in AD 70, some 40 years after Christ was crucified. Titus, the Roman general, led his army against Jerusalem. The city was utterly destroyed, and he says, and hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed, put to death. When Josephus says 1 million, he knows what he's talking about. I don't know how others have come up with 5 million. But sometimes when numbers are given, they're just giving the numbers of the men. And they're not including the women and children. And so when you think of that, you can rightfully add more, if that's the way this is being counted. From that time on, the Jews have had no national history, no separate nation, no temple, no worship. The temple was destroyed, and there's never been one since at Jerusalem. All right, now let's remember, I wrote this later on, but this commentary that we're reading was put out in 2007. So when it references certain events, talking about things that were happening then, which are 19 years ago. So it doesn't mean they don't have any value, but other things are happening to go along with it now, too. All right? The Antichrist will come out of a group of nations called the revived Roman Empire. Most experts believe that this group of nations has now come on the scene and is called by the modern non-biblical name of the European Union. Following the rapture, a popular leader will arise unlike anyone the world has ever seen. He will gain strength in Europe and then take over the world government. Well, I don't know that the Bible means us to infer from what it says that the Antichrist will not be functioning in some other personage. I don't mean personal. What I mean to say is that he won't be declaring himself as the Antichrist, nor will he be doing the evil things most specifically identified with his worst state. But it doesn't mean that he may not be in some other area of government building up to this during that time, okay? He will gain strength in Europe and then take over the world government. Daniel 9:27, the final 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel. 9:27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's the Antichrist. Shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. And the consummation of the desolate, I believe, is talking about the end of the Antichrist. The final 7 years of the 490 did not occur before the triumphal entry in AD 32, because that ended the 434-year period. They also did not take place between AD 32 and 70, because Jerusalem and the temple had to be destroyed before they could begin. They also have not taken place since 70 AD, because they cannot take place without the temple. This means everything in this verse is still future. Commentators call these final 7 years the tribulation period. He refers to the Antichrist. He has more than 30 titles in the Bible. Isn't that something? But Christians try to simplify what is said by calling him the Antichrist. This man of sin will come from the same people who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 A.D., the Romans. Today, the modern equivalent is the European Union, the EU. In ancient times, there was an Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire. The nations that form the European Union today are primarily from the Western Roman Empire. Most prophetic scholars expect this group to produce the Antichrist. However, one of the titles of the Antichrist is the Assyrian. The Assyrian. So several good scholars believe the European Union needs to expand more, in order to include that group. It is their opinion that the eastern leg must come back into being to produce the Antichrist. Now, let me just say this. That would not hold true either way if the Antichrist claims to be the Messiah, because he would have to have Jewish ancestry to be able to claim to be Messiah. Now, if he falsified that and people thought he was Jewish, because the Jews would not worship any Messiah that didn't have a Hebrew background. But he doesn't necessarily have to be the Messiah in their view. They may just see him as a wonderful new world leader that's helping them out. Okay? This verse tells us he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's the 7 years. The word confirm indicates the treaty may exist a short while before he signs it. And that was interesting. I hadn't thought of that until I read this. Thus, the beginning of the tribulation period is not when the various parties reach an agreement. It's when the Antichrist signs it. That's a ticklish little point, but I think a very good point. It is interesting to know that the European Union met some time ago and voted to confirm any covenant that can be worked out for peace in the Middle East. Well, now that's 19 years ago they did that, all right? It may be that that's still intact, but I haven't heard much about it, all right? Because that's when the time clock begins again. Yeah. When they may talk about the peace treaty, but until the Antichrist signs it, the time won't start ticking.
But in order for that to happen, that signing would happen when the temple is also already built.
I don't know that it would. It probably won't. What I'm saying, it most probably won't. Because the peaceful environment for that in which to build it has to be ratified by different nations who today are very antagonistic about the building of the Jewish temple.
And because the Bible tells us that the Antichrist will allow them and sacrifice animals for with the new temple, but if the first 3.5 years finish, and I would assume the temple would probably take maybe a couple years to build.
Yes, that's why it may be none of this really takes place till the temple is finished. The building of the temple, you see, they talk about the furniture and everything that's already built. And I have known that for many years. And at the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, and the priestly garments, and this will talk about that. All of that has already been prepared. Only thing that needs to happen is that the temple be rebuilt. And some think that maybe a smaller version will be built so they can really begin the sacrifices. So we just don't know how it's going to work out exactly. Just know when that temple starts being rebuilt, that everything we want to be on behalf of the Lord is in place. We want to be just as on target for the Lord as we can be because Jesus is so near.
Amen.
The minute that building starts to be rebuilt, we'll know that the time is so very close. Some believe the rapture will take place before that, the church will be taken out. I don't just vacillate, but I'm not absolutely convinced that the rapture may not wait until the mid-trib position. But a lot of people don't, most rapturists don't believe that. And should it be that there is no rapture, we're still going to know because these things still have to happen. Should we find ourselves having to go through the tribulation period, we're still going to stand up for the Lord. And that's easier said than done, and I know that. Not from experience, but from observation. But I do know that we can stand fast in our faith no matter what's going on as we continue to hold on to the Word of God and Jesus Christ himself. He says, they use the exact word that is found here in the text. The world does not know who the Antichrist is today, but this will be a sure sign of his identity. However, it will be after the rapture, so the church will learn about it in heaven. Now that's what he says. If the church is raptured out before the fullness of the Antichrist's identity, obviously that is what will happen. Okay? But if for some reason we're here for part of it, we're still going to be able to identify the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. Another interesting point is the fact that modern Jews say they do not trust the Palestinians to keep an agreement, so they do not want to sign a permanent treaty. They want a long-term agreement at first. If the Palestinians keep that, then they will sign a permanent treaty. I don't know if that's all still in place now after 19 years, if those ideas are still there. And on the Palestinian side, some have expressed a desire to sign a hunda, or a hudna, called a hudna, a temporary agreement, for up to 10 years, but not more. The question is, will the two sides settle on an agreement of 7 years as a compromise? Interesting. Mm-hmm. Gabriel does not spell out the conditions of this covenant, but other verses indicate that Israel will think it has peace and safety. However, the Jews will be deceived because it will be a false peace. In fact, Jesus will break the second seal in the book of Revelation, Revelation 6, 3-4, and remove peace from the earth. So the peace that the Antichrist signs for is not going to manifest the way people hope it will.
The seal referenced here is one of the 7 seals in heaven when Daniel had the vision and he says, who can open?
In the book of Revelation when John has the vision.
Oh, okay. So not
Yeah.
the one from earlier.
Right.
Okay.
Most modern Jews believe they must get permission from their Messiah to rebuild the temple. Now, I didn't know that. I had never heard that. So that may be true, but I had never heard it. Many conservative Christians believe they will wrongly accept the Antichrist as their Messiah, meaning the Jews will wrongly accept him as their Messiah. John 5:43. If this is true, it places the rebuilding of the temple at some point during the first half of the tribulation period after the Antichrist appears. Also, it changes the identity of the Antichrist. If the Jews think he's their Messiah, they have to see that he has an Abrahamic lineage. Mm-hmm. They're not going to believe anybody who doesn't have that, or at least that they don't think has it. See?
But how does that change the Messiah if you were saying that the Antichrist would have to be of Jewish descent?
For the Jews to think he's the Messiah.
I see.
I mean, they might accept him as Mr. Nice Guy who's helping him and love him all over the place and not think he's the Messiah. But if some do think he's the Messiah, there has to be some Abrahamic connection to his identity.
Because, he has to be of the Jewish.
He has to be a Jew.
Yeah.
Right. But before the tribulation period, let me get that. I had that verse. If this is true, it places the rebuilding of the temple at some point during the first half of the tribulation period after the Antichrist appears. But before the tribulation period midpoint, well, it would have to be because he goes nuts
Yeah, at the
at some
halfway
point, yeah. And they have to have had a time where they're sacrificing. So the temple has to be in place, has to be built.
This theory would be a very quick rebuild almost, right? Because it's not like the temple can be in the middle of being rebuilt and then reach the middle of the tribulation period.
Right.
Yeah, so not to, yeah.
Could it be that the temple could be in the process of being rebuilt before they even sign the peace agreement? Could be.
Yeah. I mean, that makes, time-wise, that makes more sense to me because
Yeah.
even nowadays, you try to build a house quickly, it's nearly impossible unless you're building a.
Well, and if they get to build the temple where the it's not the Mosque of Omar, but the Dome of the Rock, if that's where the temple is supposed to set, then the Dome of the Rock will be gone for that temple to be built there. Unless they figure out a way to accommodate the Muslims and have the temple next to it or something. We don't know how that's going to materialize. But remember, there are passageways under the Dome of the Rock that were passageways that were connected to the original temple, to the second temple. And they may want to have those brought back intact. I don't know. We'll find out. But before the tribulation, right. The Jewish Sanhedrin wants to build a prefabricated temple. They have a Sanhedrin today. They want to build a prefabricated temple. Owning a mobile home, I know sort of what that's like. Sanhedrin is their spiritual hierarchy. They had it in Jesus' day, and it's been reinstated. The Jewish Sanhedrin wants to build a prefabricated temple off-site today, take it apart in sections and store it, and have it ready to erect in as little as 6 weeks from the time they get permission to build it. Isn't that interesting?
Would be the prefabricated.
Yeah, well, that's...
The way to do it.
That was 19 years ago. I don't know if that's still intact or not. Yeah. They have already located the place where the red heifers were offered in the Old Testament times, and say from this they can determine exactly where the next temple should be erected. All of the utensils for the animal sacrifices, all of the garments for the priests, and all of the musical instruments for the worship services are now complete. Priests have been selected and trained. Some are actually sacrificing animals at rabbinic schools near the Temple Mound because they believe they cannot make mistakes when they do it at the temple. And they believe the only way to do it right at that time is to practice on real animals now. Red heifers are needed to make the water of purification, to cleanse the Temple Mound, and the priests who erect the temple. The herd was thought to be extinct for almost 2,000 years, but it has been reestablished. I remember some years ago when they discovered some red heifers up in, I believe it was the Wyoming area, believe it or not, in the United States. And they've found them elsewhere since then, but also there was a special dye that was used for the ink, or the dye that was used to color the priestly garments. Mm-hmm. And
off of a flower or something?
No, it was from a crustacean from the ocean.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And I think I've mentioned it before, but they found the ink source for it now, for that specific blue color that they use. The herd was thought to be extinct. We read that. Gabriel did not spell out who the many refers to. And there have been several partial agreements to date. We're talking about the different possible peace agreements. But the latest negotiations involve more people than ever before. President George W. Bush initiated the roadmap for peace in the Middle East and established the Quarter, which is the UN, the EU, Russia, and the U.S., to help bring it about. How can we have more or many than the United Nations? And notice that the EU, the home of the Antichrist, is involved. Now, he keeps calling it the home of the Antichrist because he believes that that the Antichrist will come from the Western Holy Roman Empire, or former Roman Empire. Okay, and it may be that. It may be that. Okay. This is the first time for these two groups. So the current negotiations involve the Israelis, the Palestinians, the United States, Russians, the Europeans, and the United Nations. And for 2,500 years, the Bible has said it will be a covenant with many. Well, they're working on it, aren't they? If that started 19 years ago, just remember when President Trump, when he was president before, went over and brought the capital of Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, back to Jerusalem. And everything that's going on associated with that. And there's so much we don't know that's going on. In the middle of the week, in quotes, divides the 7-year tribulation period into 2 equal segments of 3.5 years each. The first 3.5 years will be bad, but the last 3.5 years will be terrible. So the tribulation period midpoint is significant. Gabriel said, he, the Antichrist, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, from Daniel 9:27. He will declare the highly touted covenant with many signatures invalid. It is even likely that he will send a so-called peacemaker or peacemaking force into Jerusalem to prevent sacrifices and offerings from being made in the temple. Today, the EU has established its own military. They call it a peacekeeping force, or their army of peace. There's a lot being written about the EU, but there's even more being written about the United Nations and their peacekeeping force, as to where it's being deployed and what's going on the earth with it. All of these things have to show the believer that the one world government is beginning to accelerate and come to pass. He shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering implies the rebuilding of the temple. Offerings and sacrifices have to start before they can be stopped, and they have always been made at the temple. This lets us know that at least for a very short time, Israel will have, at the very least, some sort of limited sovereignty over East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Also, at the middle of the tribulation period, the Antichrist will set up an abomination that causes desolation. The abomination of desolation, that will be something that desecrates or contaminates the temple. Gabriel does not say what it is, but there is good reason to believe that it is an image of the Antichrist that he calls everyone to worship. Whatever it is, the Jews should flee into the mountains when it happens, because tribulation and death will be their lot in Jerusalem. Here we see, too, that the temple will be defiled, even until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate. That means when the Antichrist is destroyed. Daniel 9:27. This means that until 490 years are complete, and the Antichrist is captured and cast into the lake of burning sulfur, the lake of fire. One final comment on this chapter. Much has been said about the critics who suggest that the traditional Daniel didn't write this book. Many believe a substitute Daniel wrote it around 100 or 200 BC. There's an overwhelming pile of evidence to prove they are wrong. But suppose they are right, and the book was written when they say their substitute Daniel still predicted the exact day that Messiah would arrive in his march on Palm Sunday, and what would happen to him more than 100 years before it happened. If someone could foretell it 100 years before it happened, someone could foretell it 500 to 600 years before it happened. In other words, the real Daniel is who he claims to be. Grant Jeffrey says, it is intriguing to note that the ancient Jewish sages also interpreted the prophecy of Daniel 9:24 through 27 to teach that the Messiah, the son of David, will literally appear at the end of the 7-year period of the great troubles, which is tribulation, suffering and distress. For example, the Babylonian Talmud contains the following statement regarding the return of the Messiah. And I quote, "Our rabbis taught in the 7-year cycle at the end of which the Son of David will come." Yes, at the conclusion of the septenate 7-year period, the Son of David will come. In another passage, the Babylonian Talmud reported the advent of the Messiah was pictured as being preceded by years of great distress. Pardon me? Yes. Oh yeah, those are Jewish books. Yeah. Yeah, they're like commentaries. Uh-huh. I believe that's true. It's in the general second coming. Yeah. Doesn't mean that the minute we start to get in the clouds, we won't see him. The rest of the world will not. And I guess we don't know if our bodies are going to drop dead and our spirits are going to all go up, or if our bodies are going to ascend. Will they see our bodies ascend? Wouldn't that be something? I'm praying that our animals get to go with us. I mean that. I mean that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to do the chapter wrap up next week. Okay? And I promise I won't go back to 26 again. Praise God. Well, bless every one of you out there in TV land. As we're approaching now, this is Holy Week. And Friday is Good Friday, of course. Thursday, I think it has been called Maundy Thursday. And it's just a kind of a time when we can be kind of pensive about what Jesus has done for us. Some churches have Good Friday services. We have had that. We won't be having one this year, but we might do it next year, if the Lord tarries. But we wish you the most wonderful Resurrection Sunday as we prepare to dwell upon and rejoice in Jesus' conquering of death, his resurrection from the dead, and the salvation that it has provided for all who will trust in him. Bless you and have a wonderful week. And remember, we'll be meeting for our, in quotes, Resurrection Easter service at about 11 o'clock on Sunday morning at 4160 Monroe Street, Los Angeles, California, 90029. Please feel free to come. We might just have to hug you. Good night. And there is no men's prayer breakfast this coming Saturday. It was just too close to Easter preparation and such. So we'll do that again in May.